Good Thursday afternoon to everybody. Thanks for clicking on to the Tropical Outlook today. Normally a Wednesday or a Saturday, but this week it happens to be a Thursday. Wanted to look back initially at No Name. Essentially, this was a system that was given a potential tropical cyclone 8. It was attached to a stalled frontal system to the east of the United States, and it never ever got the chance to become fully tropical. It didn't even develop subtropical characteristics either. But I wanted to highlight this anyway because it did have elements of tropical aspects to it, and this would have been given the name Helene. This was back at the start of the working week. And what was significant about this system, if we play through this high-res loop along with the lightning activity as well, you can see here these very, very impressive thunderstorms as they drove in off a warm Atlantic into the southern portions of North Carolina. Cloud tops in excess of 50,000 feet. The kind of, cauliflower type cloud. You could really see the intensity of the thunderstorms as they moved in off the Atlantic and into North Carolina, dumping as much as 18 inches of rain within a 3-hour period. And long-term residents have said they've never seen as much rain in such a short period of time. So while it wasn't tropical, it certainly packed a tropical punch. Winds in excess of hurricane force, nearly 20 inches of rain. In fact, there was 20 inches of rain in a few spots. And it really was like a tropical system coming ashore. I also wanted to show you here, this was the typhoon that ran into Shanghai back during the weekend and into early this week as well. This was actually the strongest typhoon to hit Shanghai, China since 1949, with wind gusts in excess of 142 kilometers per hour. So, yeah, there's still things going on despite the fact that the Atlantic has been so quiet. We've got Gordon, it's dissipated. NHC thinks it may redevelop over the central Atlantic over the next several days or so. So we'll keep our eyes closely fixed on this. But I wanted to also have a very quick look at how the season has panned out so far. So let's look at the Westpac first. And you can see here, this is the all the tracks of the systems for the year to date. So generally, the season runs between May and October in the West Pacific, but it can run pretty much throughout the majority of the calendar year. But up until now, we have seen 22 depressions, 14 storms, 6 typhoons, and unofficially 1 super typhoon, which was Yagi, which ran ashore across northern Henan Island, just to the southeast of China. Back a couple of weeks ago, winds in excess of 150 mile per hour, I believe it was. Looking at the Atlantic basin, if I can get to it, it would certainly be helpful. So just bear with me a little second here. And we can see what the latest stats are showing for the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. Obviously, it has been a fairly quiet season so far, with multiple reasons for that. Dry air, distortion of warm waters further north, affecting the wind flow pattern. ITCZ further north compared to average, wind shear, dry air, the unfavourable Mann-Julian oscillation, and there's even been some scientists came out and said the solar maximum that we've seen during the month of heightened activity from the sun during August in particular has also had an effect on dampening the hurricane season development and so forth here. So it certainly has been, from a scientific point of view, an interesting season, given the fact that the majority of forecasts all had a hyperactive season, and essentially we have not seen that taking place. But I'm going to give you reasons to believe that this may change as we go towards the final days of September into the early portions of October here. We've still got a long way to go, and I think it's very easy to write this season off. But up until now, anyway, we have seen 7 depressions, total storms, 7 hurricanes, 4 major hurricanes. It feels like a century ago that Beryl developed into a Cat 5 hurricane. The earliest, furthest east developing hurricane, and also the earliest Category 5 on record as well, developing late June, early July. And the last system obviously has been Gordon. If you look at this chart here, Gordon developed as a wave off Africa, then dissipated over the central main development region here. But if we look at the latest of the NHC, we do have two areas. This is for the next 48 hours. So there's the remnants of Gordon, 20% chance of redeveloping over the next 48 hours. And we've also got another area here just to the west of that here at a 10% chance over the next 7 days as well, developing, or 48 hours, sorry. If we look at the 7 day, we can see the prospects going forward. Now, we'll talk about this area in the Caribbean and the Southern Gulf in just a second here. But this is Gordon's remnants. Over the next 7 days, NHC has a 30% chance of development. The system disturbance to 20% over the next 7 days. But if we look over towards the Gulf and the Southern Caribbean, you can see a 40% chance of development here. Now, the reasons for that is that there is a feature, what is known as the Central American gyre. We actually seen this during the early portions of the season. These features tend to develop during the spring and the autumn season here. So generally kind of late May, early June, but also late September, October, even November. These elongated large envelopes of low pressure tend to form over Central America. And what can happen here, this is a tweet by Michael Lowry, a tropical expert. There's still a long way to go, and we don't know about where, when, or if the system comes together next week. But given the time of the year and largely conducive environment, folks along the Gulf Coast and Florida Peninsula should check back on the trends. So this large gyre of low pressure can spin up their individual vortices and spin off this larger area of low pressure. And the models are kind of picking up on that. The reason why also this gyre is developing is that if we look at the Mann-Julian oscillation here, this is how it looks over the next 7 days. And we've had this large upward motion area over the West Pacific, hence why we've seen somewhat of an uptick in typhoon activity. We've had Yagi, we've had Shan, we've had multiple other systems developing, and it's because the MJO has been generally in this region through the majority of the season, actually. But notice here that we're starting to see greens upward motion. So obviously the oranges represent sinking, and the greens represent rising motion within the atmosphere. But we're starting to see the MJO push eastwards here, and by the time we reach the end of this period, we're actually seeing the MJO going into the Atlantic basin. So it looks as if we're going to start to become more favourable for upward motion, lower pressure development. And it's generally at this time of the year, the main development region tends to quieten down a little bit. Water temperatures are starting to cool a little bit, and we tend to find that the development tends to focus more towards the further west over the Atlantic basin. So we're kind of going back to where we were at the start of the season, where development tends to be Caribbean and Gulf. Frontal systems moving off the North American continent, for example, tends to spin up features that can become tropical storms or hurricanes. But we're going back to that as we move towards the latter half of the season. But like I've said before, there is still a long way to go. But this is off the GFS ensemble. And you can see here we really reverse the upward versus sinking motion within the atmosphere, with sinking over the West Pacific and the majority of the basin, in fact, and rising over the majority of the Atlantic and the Americas. So that would suggest to me that it's supporting this developing Central American gyre, and then the modelling is picking up on something spinning off that gyre and moving into the Gulf of Mexico. This is the latest off the GOES 16. This is the IR imagery. Notice here the lack of activity over the main development region here. Even the African waste train is starting to quieten down, even though it feels as if it's never really gotten going in the first place. But you can see here, this is the remnants of Gordon here. Big blow up with thunderstorms here. Some cold cloud tops associated with that. But you notice here that we've got the convection going. This is the feature disturbance 2. Notice here the convection is getting blown to the west. We're also seeing Gordon's remnants blown to the east. So there is shear within these two features, and they're probably kind of fighting against each other as well. Little bit of convection here to the south, well to the east of the leewards here. We've got this stalled out frontal system that feels as if it's been stuck forever off the east coast and south coast of the United States. But not a whole lot to speak about here. We've got this little flare up just to the east of that's either Nicaragua or Honduras, I can't remember which. And then we've got this area of larger thunderstorm activity. What I would expect to see over the next week or so is this thunderstorm activity start to blossom further east, West Caribbean, stretching to the East Pacific. That would be that circulation, that larger circulation developing. And it's NHC is picking up in the fact that the modelling is kind of trending towards some sort of system spinning off that and then developing. We've got obviously super warm waters over the Caribbean and the Gulf. Depth of that warmth extends well below the surface as well. So anything that does develop, if you've got a low shear, and obviously we've got a lack of dry air in place as well now, that can all become very, very favourable. By the way, this was the GFS output yesterday. This was for Saturday the 20th of September. Obviously, you take these deterministic runs with a very large grain of salt, but they had a 934 monster hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico towards the end of the month. Let's have a quick look at the latest modelling here and see what it's indicating. So let's go to the 6Z run of the GFS model here. So this is obviously looking over the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Play through the loop here. Lots of convection here. We're moistening the atmosphere up in this region as the MJO moves east. The development of that jar looks likely. And is the latest run of the GFS pointing to anything? It sees something spinning up here in the Western Caribbean, crosses over the Yucatan, and then moves into the Bay of Campeche. Starts to really deepen here. Notice here again, like yesterday, becoming a bona fide hurricane, kind of bouncing around over the Gulf of Mexico here. Notice here, 958 millibars here to the east over the Western Atlantic Basin, while we've got a feature moving into the northwest of Florida. That's the GFS run. Let's have a look at other models here, and then we'll look at the ensemble. That's more important to look at, is the ensemble, because it tends to show a little bit more of a proper trend in the modelling here. So this is the AIFS, the AI, the Artificial Intelligence model of the ECMWF. We'll play through this loop and see what it's showing. So again, large area of green representing moisture and convective potential. There's the system then kind of starting to develop here in the Western Caribbean, similar to the GFS crossing over the Yucatan, and then it moves into what appeared to be Mexico, comes back out, then goes back towards the Yucatan. So again, the modeling's all over the place. But the question mark is, what is the overall trend in these models? So the AI model is pretty much all over the place with that scenario. Looking at the CMC model, see what it is suggesting here with regards to anything developing here. Again, it sees a low developing here, branching off the main gyre, moves up between the channel between Cuba and Yucatan, and then starts to really deepen and tighten here. Notice here, pressure down to 976 millibars here, so possibly a low-end hurricane moving into the area between New Orleans and Pensacola, Florida, sometime towards the end of next week here. So that's the GEM, the GEM model here. Let me see if we can see any other interesting output by the models here. Let's have a look at the hurricane output as well. So let's go to the HAPS B model and see, is it going to give me this here? It's just showing me Gordon, so it's not going to give me that. Let's have a look finally at the GFS ensemble and see what it is indicating here. So just bear with me a little second here. Can we go to, let's go to the Vortmax chart here. So let's go to some of the spin within the atmosphere, the potential showing up of the model here. So again, these areas of yellow represent spin and vorticity within the atmosphere. We've got that TD2 appears to be showing up in the model here. Looking at the Central America region here for any kind of spin up, it's indicating a little bit of turning, moving out of the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico, but nothing essentially bundling. If you notice here as we play it through, it looks as if it's trying to get some sort of circulation moving into the central Gulf Coast region. But this is the problem. This is the GFS ensemble not really picking up in anything particular, while the individual deterministic models are seeing something developing here. But I think this certainly bodes watching as we go through the next couple of weeks or so here. I think with the MJO expected to move into the Atlantic Basin, bodily move into the Atlantic Basin for really the first time since the beginning of the season, actually. I think we should start to keep our eyes closely fixed on this. I think it is going to get somewhat interesting as we move into next week. Looking at the CIMSS website, this is from the University of Wisconsin here, showing we do have a tropical depression Pulasan that was a tropical storm moved into eastern China. Then we had the tropical depression Sulek that moved into what appears to be Vietnam. No areas of concern over the Indian Ocean at the moment here. We've got the Invest area 7L, over the central portion of the Atlantic Basin at the moment here. Looking at the weekly mean storm strike probabilities over the next several days here, and we've got some increased strike probability. That is Pulasan and Sulek moving into Eastern Asia. Then we've got this feature just to the east of the Carolina coast. Then that's probably the remnants of Gordon here, expected to move into the central North Atlantic. As we play through the loop here, you notice here as we move towards the 23rd and the 30th of September, still got some activity over the West Pacific here, but we're starting to increase the chance of the west coast of Mexico, off the southeastern United States. There is some of the ECM output suggesting some development here in the main development region within the African wave train. We've also got increased chance growing further west over the Atlantic, and this would be in conjunction with the MJO shifting into the Atlantic. So yeah, the season is by no means done yet, and I think that is one thing that is important to remember, is the fact that we still have quite a long way to go. But I wanted to show you another couple of little factors that were interesting here. This was an interesting tweet by Michael Lowry of the dust. So actually, after recording the second dustiest July since 2002, so this was July just gone, it was the second dustiest month since 2002, the tropical North Atlantic saw a remarkable, this surprised me, saw a remarkable drop in dust cover starting in mid-August, with the lowest dust concentrations on record over the past month. So dust has been a big factor, one of the factors that has been blaming the lack of activity over the Atlantic Basin. But yet, even though we had a very dusty July, it's not been particularly dusty from mid-August till now. So it goes from second dustiest to least dustiest in the space of a month or so, which I thought was rather interesting. Looking at also storm track potential at this time of the year, this is another interesting one. Michael goes on to say that here's a look at all the tropical cyclones to form in the area outlined by NHC in the late September to early October since 1966 within the satellite era. The climatology looks an awful lot like our models next week, nearly everything on the table. So obviously this is the congregation of development between late September and early October. Generally speaking, remember I showed you in the models here, a lot of development here within the Western Caribbean moving northwards. And these are the systems that did develop here. We had Stan in 2005, Keith 2000, Karen 2013, Opal in 95. We had unnamed system moving into northwest Florida in 1974. Jenny, what was this? That was 1969. an unnamed system in 1968. Then we had several big beasts developing here. Obviously, we need to remember things like Wilma that developed in 2005 during the month of October. But it's interesting how it's all this general region right in the Western Caribbean where development has occurred between the 22nd of September and the 5th of October. I thought that was quite an interesting. And this is the ECMWF. This is cyclone locations development over the next 7 days. This is the potential anyway. And you can see it's almost textbook. Western Caribbean development, and then it's take your pick as to where they go after that. Generally moves north, if you notice. And there's only a few tracks, in fact, one or two that have developed over the Eastern Caribbean at this time of year. So climatology suggests that, yes, the reformation of the Central American jar, like we've seen at the end of May, early June, then redevelops at this time of the year, tends to be, and then anything that spins up almost always goes up into the Gulf of Mexico. We've also got activity over the Western Open Atlantic as well to speak about. So interesting stuff. And this is finally another graphic here by Michael Lowry showing the potential situation mid to late next week. Is it going to show me the graphic here? So yeah, accept all. So this is the graphic that's been produced by Michael, I think. And it says here, tracking development here mid to late next week. Area of low pressure over the Yucatan Peninsula. Wide range of outcomes. We've got a ridge over northern Mexico and the southeastern United States. We've also got a large ridge here, the Bermuda High, to the east over the Western Open Atlantic. And therefore, really, you would expect to see anything that tries to develop moving towards the central and eastern Gulf of Mexico. So it's all to play for. Interesting times, I think, coming up. I think I've probably said that more than once this season, and it obviously has not materialised. So we'll wait and see what happens. MJO finally moving into the Atlantic, it looks like, over the next week to 10 days. Let's watch the development of this gyre, whether we can see a feature spinning off that and then developing. It will all be to play for. I will have another update on Saturday, all being well, so stay tuned for that here, and plenty more content here in the channel coming up. If you're enjoying it, hit that like button, and if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button as well. Much appreciated. Coming up shortly will be the European Outlook, and then beyond that, we're going to have a big weekend coming up as well. European Outlook tomorrow, then a Tropical Outlook Saturday, and then the live stream, all being well, give or take, technical problems last week. It should be normal this week at 4 p.m, so stay tuned for that as well. So enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and I'll see you later on with the European Outlook. Bye for now.